Yo, what's going on, YouTube? And welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy, Kevin 410. We are continuing this season preview series today as we take a look at the Montreal Canadiens. So, the Canadiens, they had a pretty good 2020 going to the Stanley Cup final up against the Tampa Bay Lightning. They didn't fare too well in the final, but this could be a very different looking team in the fall. A lot of people are writing off the Habs. We'll be looking at my opinions on them this year. So let's take a look at the key subtractions to the Montreal Canadiens. Now, there weren't a ton of guys that left. They lost Corey Perry. He went to free agency. And Philip Deneau. They decided not to extend him. Now, they also lost defenseman Cale Fleury in the expansion draft. Not a huge loss, but a guy that definitely, it hurts. You know, it's some defensive depth that they lost. They really tried to keep him during the season from going to waivers and stuff like that. Teams have been circling the Habs to try and get Cale Fleury. It's all for naught as he goes to the expansion draft, Seattle Kraken. Looking at the additions, they definitely have a decent amount of additions. They had Mike Hoffman through free agency. Hometown boy Cedric Paquette comes over. I always had a sense that he would go to the Montreal Canadiens, and it's made official here. Another Quebec native, Matthew Perreault. Again, just by the name, you could tell. French guy. So cool to see them both in Montreal next year. David Savard comes in. He's going to be a huge part of this team, especially because of the loss of Shea Weber. Shea Weber's injury could take him out of the entire 2021-2022 NHL season, which means they're going to rely on David Savard a lot this year, and especially with him beating the Montreal Canadiens in the Stanley Cup final. I guess Marc Bergevin saw enough of him where he's like, yeah, you know what? I wouldn't mind investing long-term in David Savard. So, good stuff there. And then they add Chris Weidman, who comes back to the NHL. He was a big part of that situation a couple years ago with the Ottawa Senators. Remember when there was that whole tire fire going on, and then Matt Duchene, Chris Weidman, was it Austin Watson? Somebody else, a bunch of guys were in the taxi, and they were talking shit about the coach, and the taxi driver or the Uber driver recorded it all, posted on the internet, got them all in trouble. Chris Weidman was one of those guys. So he went over to the KHL, and he did pretty well in the KHL. I think he won like Defenseman of the Year or MVP of the KHL. So he comes back to North America, and he's going to play with the Montreal Canadiens. So good stuff there. And that's really what it comes down to. Now, looking at their top point producers last year, let's see if I could find that. Come on. Where is it? There we go. So Tyler Toffoli led the team in points last year, 44 points. Jeff Petrie, Nick Suzuki, Tomas Tatar, who is no longer there, Philip Deneau, no longer there. And there still might be some changes in Montreal as Jonathan Drouin, the Quebec native from the Tampa Bay Lightning, in that Sergachev trade, that trade looks worse and worse by the day. Jonathan Drouin may find his way out of Montreal by the beginning of the season. And you have guys like Kotkaniemi, Paul Byron, Yoel Armia. So we're going to see those guys continue to develop in Montreal. The Canadiens have no cap space right now. But as guys go on long-term injured reserve, Carey Price might be ready to go from training camp. But Shea Weber seems like the LTI guy this year for the Habs. You look at their top six: Tyler Toffoli, Nick Suzuki, and Cole Caulfield. Suzuki and Caulfield are the future of this team. So we're going to see them very prevalent in the Habs lineup as guys that were kind of scratch pad players during the end of the regular season. They're now on the top line in Montreal. Looking at the second line, again, this is going to likely change if they trade Jonathan Drouin. Jesperi Kotkaniemi, and Brendan Gallagher as your second line. I think it's still TBA on that situation there with Drouin. And then you look at the third line, you got Mike Hoffman, Jake Evans, and Josh Anderson. And rounding out the bottom six, you have Artturi Lehkonen, Cedric Paquette, and Yoel Armia. Not to mention some of the depth players that they have picked up this offseason. Like I said, guys like Matthew Perreault in that conversation. Ryan Poehling could be another prospect that they'll look at. Jan Mysak, Jesse Yelenin, Alex Belzile, And Cameron Hillis, I don't think we're going to see him. But there are guys here in the AHL with the Laval Rocket that may get a chance in Montreal next season. And looking at their defense, that's another interesting story. If you look at the Habs blue line, you've got Joel Edmondson and Jeff Petrie as your top pair. And the second pair is going to look a little different. Alexander Radulov, a top four defenseman, alongside David Savard. Kind of like Mikhail Sergachev and Savard. I think that's a pretty good tandem. That could really work well. And then you have Ben Chiarot and Chris Weidman rounding out your third pair. So, considering they lost David Savard, it's not they didn't lose Savard. Shea Weber, considering they lost Shea Weber, they still have some meat on the back end. Joel Edmondson, not a fun guy to play against. Savard, definitely not fun to play against. And a guy like Ben Chiarot, again, that's a tough cookie to play against, as well as Chris Weidman. They definitely have some pretty good defensive depth. And then you look at their goaltending, Carey Price and Jake Allen, that will stay the same as last season, and that actually worked pretty well. And I think we could see that continue to be a successful tandem going into next season, not to mention some of the depth. They have Brett Kulak as a guy that could jump in, Caden Gould, Xavier Ouellet, Louis Belpedio, Josh Brook. We could see some of those guys sprinkle into the lineup throughout the season. And then in between the pipes depth, they have Caden Primo and Michael McNiven, as they have lost Charlie Lindgren, who has moved on. So, is this a team that could make the Stanley Cup playoffs? Honestly, it's pretty wide open. I think the question is, how big of a loss is Shea Weber? Because Shea Weber, we know, was a huge piece of that defense last year. He was a horse on the back end. And the question is, will guys like Jeff Petrie have another really good year? Will the scoring continue to produce? I mean, it's a good thing they brought in guys like Mike Hoffman, because he's going to add some depth to the scoring group. And they may really need that throughout points this season. There's a team that I can see in the playoffs, but again, I wouldn't be surprised if they're one of the teams like Dallas last year, where they go to the Cup final and they went all in and they end up falling off the year after. I wouldn't be surprised with any of those situations. Now the question is, that Atlantic division is still pretty good. I mean, you have the Tampa Bay Lightning, who are trying to three-peat. The Toronto Maple Leafs, they're pretty good. And then you look at teams like Boston, the Montreal Canadiens, they're all kind of in a tier of their own. And we may even see the emergence of a team like Ottawa a little bit this year. So it's not a foregone conclusion that the Montreal Canadiens get in. And the criticism of Marc Bergevin's teams in the past have been, this is a team that's really good in the playoffs, but you have to get through the 82-game schedule first to get you into those said playoffs. But I think with additions like David Savard, with guys like Mike Hoffman, those are guys that can help get you into the Stanley Cup playoffs. And I believe the Habs will be in the playoffs in 2022. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Do you think they'll be maybe trying to fight for one of those bottom picks? Or do you think they will, in fact, be not only a playoff team, but potentially a Stanley Cup contender next year as well? Let me know down below. And if you guys like what we're doing here at Goal Line Hockey, want to see the latest news around the NHL and more videos just like this one, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and an even bigger subscribe down below. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys next time.